In 1840, a group of merchants in Boston had a very clear problem. They were paying privately trained guards to protect their ships, and they were also paying extra security to protect goods moving from the port to the warehouses. Basically, they were doing business, but every year the cost of security was taking a serious cut out of their profits. Then an idea came up. What if they didn't have to pay for that private security anymore? What if that cost could be shifted onto the public? And what if this new arrangement was called a police department? And how would the public react to that? At first, that might sound a little absurd, but what we're talking about here is not a theory. This is a documented historical shift, with traces in Boston's own archival records. And that shift forces us to rethink a lot of what we think we know about American policing. Because today the police feel like something natural, something old, something that has always existed as a public institution. It almost feels like if there is a city, then of course there must be police. If there is a society, then of course there must be a station house. But when you look back at the first 200 years of American history, there was no police institution in the modern sense. No department, no station, no badge, no uniform, and no 911 you could call. So what did people do? Before 1840, American cities relied on a system inherited from medieval England called the Night Watch. Boston started one in 1636, New York followed in 1658, Philadelphia followed in 1700. The idea was actually pretty simple. Volunteer citizens would walk the streets from sunset to sunrise. They carried a rattle and a long pole painted blue and white. They looked for fires, listened for fights, checked for disturbances, and if they saw something wrong, they usually didn't handle it alone. Instead, they would start what was called a hue and cry. They would shake the rattle and shout. The goal was to get nearby people to come running and help. So the watchman wasn't really someone fighting crime by himself. He was more like a walking alarm system with legs. On paper, it sounded simple enough, but in practice, it didn't work very well. Because these watchmen were often drinking on the job. Sometimes they slept through their shifts. In some places, watchmen were required to call out the hour loudly, but that wasn't really to inform the public. It was to prove they were still awake. And one of the strangest parts of the whole system was this. In some colonies, night watch duty was given as a punishment. So if you committed a minor crime, your sentence could literally be walking around at night, pretending to protect everyone else. Think about that. The person you thought was protecting your neighborhood might only be there because he got caught stealing from someone else. But it gets even more interesting. At the time, able-bodied men could be called to serve on the watch. But if you had enough money, you didn't have to do it yourself. You could pay someone else to do it for you. So who did the wealthy hire? According to crime historian Gary Potter, those substitutes were often criminals, neighborhood toughs, or people who were already considered troublemakers. So basically, the system worked like this. Your street was either being protected by someone serving punishment or by some rough character hired by a rich man who didn't want to do the job himself. And for about 200 years, that was mostly the system. The constables who supervised the night watch weren't much better. They also worked on a fee-based system. That means they got paid for every warrant they served. Their income depended less on preventing crime and more on processing crime. The more warrants they served, the more money they made. The more arrests they made, the better their year was. But no one was measuring the things that actually mattered. Was the neighborhood safer? Was crime prevented? Were people more at peace? No. The only thing being measured was the number of crimes processed. So this looked like public safety, but in reality, it had turned into a kind of business model. And no one wealthy enough to matter was really complaining, because they already had private security. While this broken volunteer system continued in the North, something very different and much darker was being built in the South. In 1704, the Carolina colonies created the first official slave patrols. These were groups of armed white men on horseback. They had the authority to stop, search, and brutalize enslaved people found without written permission from their enslavers. Virginia followed in 1727. North Carolina followed in 1753. By the end of the century, every slaveholding state had these patrols. The men serving in these patrols were required to swear an oath that they would search enslaved people for guns, swords, and other weapons. That oath is recorded as one of the earliest known sworn statements in the history of American law enforcement. But pay attention to what it actually was. It was not an oath saying, "I will protect citizens." It was an oath saying, "I will search people who have been deprived of their freedom for weapons and blades." So one of the earliest organized law enforcement systems in American history was not built to prevent crime. It was built to control freedom. These were not random groups. They were state-approved, organized forces with defined powers and systematic operations. By 1840, the Charleston Slave Patrol had more than 100 officers. That made it the largest organized police force in America, larger than any city night watch, much larger than any constable system in the North. And here, the truly disturbing point becomes clear. The first professional law enforcement apparatus in this country was not designed to stop crime. It was designed to stop freedom. Now, to be fair, we do have to consider the official explanation, because in the early 1800s, American cities really were growing fast. New York's population was approaching 400,000. An 80-man night watch was obviously not enough for a city that size. Crime was rising, riots were happening, immigration from Europe was accelerating, social tension was increasing. Something had to change. And Robert Peel's professional police model, created in London in 1829, gave American cities a template to look at. All of that is true. I'm not denying that cities needed a better system. The night watch really was failing. But my question is different. Who was the new system actually designed for? Because the evidence points in a very specific direction, and that direction is not the general public. In 1840, Boston was one of the biggest maritime trade centers in America. Merchants were paying out of their own pockets to hire private guards to protect their goods at the port and along trade routes. Then someone realized the math could be arranged differently. If the protection of commercial goods could be presented not as a private cost, but as a matter of public safety, then the expense could be shifted from merchants to taxpayers. And the city created the day police. 6 officers under the city marshal, the first publicly funded police force in American history. But this was not an institution created because citizens voted and said, "Please protect us." This was the result of commercial interests finding a way to make the public pay their security bill. The full Boston Police Department reached 250 officers in 1854. Each officer was paid $2 per shift. Their main job was described as maintaining order. But in practice, that mostly meant protecting property and controlling the people who were seen as threatening commercial activity. New York followed the same path in 1845. The state legislature allowed up to 800 police officers. And what happened next shows how troubled the system was from the very beginning. The officers refused to wear uniforms, and not quietly. They held a public rally that drew 1,500 people. They stood in front of the crowd and described the proposed uniform almost like a symbol of servitude. They said they were not serfs. They argued that being forced to identify themselves as police would bury popular freedom. Some were fired for refusing to wear the uniform. They went to court. It took 8 years of bitter public debate before New York finally accepted uniforms in 1853. The first uniform consisted of a leather helmet, a blue coat buttoned up to the neck, and grey trousers with a black stripe. But even 20 years later, in 1874, officers were still reporting that wearing the uniform caused them to hear insulting remarks from the public. Think about that. These men were hired to maintain order. They carried 14-inch clubs, but they didn't want anyone to know they were police, and the public didn't want to know either. So the institution was born in mutual distrust from day one. Then there is the issue of training. There was none at all. Officers were nominated by the alderman of the political ward where they lived. They were appointed for 1- or 2-year terms. If the ward boss liked you, you got a badge. If he didn't, you were gone. What a merit-based institution, right? And honestly, how different do you think the system is today? By the 1870s, the Tammany Hall political machine had come to control almost every appointment in the New York Police Department. Police positions were openly bought and sold. The police were not serving the public, they were serving the political power that put them on the street in the first place. When I spent time researching this, what surprised me most was not the lack of evidence. It was the opposite. There was a lot of evidence. And not in unknown or secret sources, in open, official sources, in public records. What really made me stop was this. If all of this is so available, why isn't it part of common history? The Boston Police Department's own official website tells its history. It gives the dates. It mentions the night watch. It mentions the day police of 1840. So the information isn't hidden. But the story is told so flatly that almost no one stops to ask the most important question: who benefited from it? In school, you learn about the Boston Tea Party. You learn about the Constitutional Convention. But you don't learn that the first police officers in American history grew out of commercial interests and private security needs. Or maybe they don't want to teach it that way. You don't learn that it was a system connected to merchant interests, political patronage, and officers who didn't even want to be publicly identified. Or maybe the system doesn't make much effort to help you learn that. That omission doesn't feel accidental, it feels structural. And this distorted system started breaking down much faster than anyone expected. Only 12 years after New York created its police force, the city had 2 separate police forces. Mayor Fernando Wood controlled the municipal police, which was loyal to his democratic political machine. In 1857, the Republican state legislature created a new metropolitan police force to replace Wood's men. Wood refused to disband. On June 16, 1857, the 2 police forces attacked each other on the steps of City Hall. Officers in blue uniforms fought officers in blue uniforms. No one knew which force had legal authority. According to one account from the time, criminals in 5 Points were dancing in the streets while the 2 police forces fought each other. Arrests made by one force were overturned by the other. Suspects captured by the municipal police were released by the Metropolitan Police. The idea of law and order suddenly became a comedy. Eventually, the National Guard had to be called in. The State Court of Appeals ruled that the Metropolitan Police were legitimate. But here's the point: 12 years. That is all it took for American policing to physically go to war with itself. The institution was so controlled by politicians with competing interests that two rival power centers created two small rival armies. And the citizens those armies were supposed to protect could only watch from the sidelines. And they were the ones paying for both of them with their taxes. When you follow the money, the pattern keeps going. By the 1880s, NYPD Superintendent Thomas Byrnes had built up a personal fortune of $350,000. In today's money, that is roughly $9.6 million. How does a police superintendent get that kind of money? Through investments made on his behalf by Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould, two of the richest men in America. In other words, the head of the city's police force was being personally enriched by the financial elites of the time. In return, the NYPD did not hesitate to use harsh suppression and intimidation against unions and political opposition. The city's bankers, stockbrokers, and real estate developers tolerated police corruption because the police kept their boot on the throat of anyone who spoke up. Taxpayers funded the force, the wealthy directed it, and the police superintendent pocketed the financial reward. That triangle does not look like an exception. It looks more like a blueprint. And then it scaled. By the 1880s, every major American city had a police department. All of them were publicly funded. All of them were built on the same basic structure. And all of them answered not directly to voters, but to politicians and commercial interests. The growth was not driven only by rising crime. It was driven by the need to control labor. Irish, Italian, German, and Eastern European immigrants were coming into the cities. They were forming unions. They were organizing strikes. They were demanding better wages. And the people profiting from their labor needed a publicly funded mechanism to keep them under control. That is not speculation. That is history itself. Crime historian Gary Potter documents that, by the end of the century, fear of labor, unions, and immigrant populations played a major role in the expansion of police forces across large cities. If your family came through Ellis Island, if your great-grandmother or great-grandfather worked on the docks, in factories, or on the railroads, think about this. The police force in their city was not built to protect them, it was built to manage them. And now bring that into the present. The structure may look completely different, but the financial system, capitalism itself, still feels very similar. The badges are different. Training exists in theory. Procedures exist. But the flow of money, the size of the institution, and its place in public budgets still raise the same basic question. Total public spending on policing in the United States reached $237.7 billion in 2024. The NYPD budget alone exceeds $5.44 billion a year. In many American cities, policing is the largest single item in the general fund. Sometimes it takes up 40 to 60% of the city budget, and the public funds it every year. A structure that began when a group of shipping merchants in 1838 shifted their private security costs onto the public. Now, I want to be careful here. The point is not to say police serve no purpose, and the point is not to say public safety doesn't matter. That would be too easy, and it would dodge the real question. The real question is this: can an institution designed from the beginning to serve commercial interests ever structurally serve the public? Especially when we're talking about an institution that was controlled by political machines from its first decade and corrupted by financial elites from its first generation. Night watchmen were often drunk, careless, or criminal. Slave patrols were state-backed terror. The first police departments were merchant-funded systems of political patronage. Each phase did not completely replace the one before it. It absorbed it, expanded it, renamed it. Today you walk past police stations every day. You see patrol cars parked on your street. When you need to, you call the number without thinking. The institution feels like it has always been here. But it hasn't. For most of American history, it wasn't here at all. And when it appeared, it did not appear because citizens demanded protection. It appeared because people with money found a way to make the public pay for a security service they used to pay for themselves. The records still exist. The timeline is clear. The names are in the public record. But the question that never makes it into the textbooks is the one that matters most. If the people who built this system didn't build it for you, then who did they build it for? And if, 2 centuries later, it still runs on a similar financial architecture, has the answer really changed? $237 billion a year. Same architecture, same question. The night watchman's rattles went silent a long time ago. The 6-foot poles were retired long ago. Slave patrols lost their legal authority in 1865 and were reorganized under other names. But the bills never stopped. They only got bigger. The line between who pays and who benefits has never been fully redrawn. Every year, billions of dollars are taken from the public to fund an institution the public never designed from scratch, never truly requested, and was never given the chance to build from the ground up. This structure was designed this way in 1838, and since then, it has never truly been redesigned from the beginning. The merchants are gone, but the invoice remains.